According to the official game score metric, the single greatest individual performance in NBA history was by Michael Jordan. Oh, wait a minute. What about Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game? Well, the NBA's official formula for game score is deeply flawed, as it leaves out crucial context that a raw box score can't highlight. Until now. After adjusting the formula to account for decades of historical context and applying the methodology to over 60,000 NBA games, I finally have the answer. To recap, this metric breaks down everything that a player does in a game into one singular, all-encompassing number. Positive stats like points, rebounds, and assists increase your score, while negative stats such as turnovers, fouls, and missed shots decrease your game score. Before we can crown the greatest game in NBA history, there's something we need to address: the data. In some eras, entire categories just don't exist. No blocks, no steals. In summary, we don't have official game score metrics pre-1977 because steals, blocks, and turnovers weren't officially tracked at the time. But I was curious anyway. Would Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game actually rank number 1? Well, I decided to find out. But first, because the data isn't fully complete, there's some assumptions that we need to make. For the games where some stats weren't tracked, I placed a 0 for those categories, with the thought that the number of steals and blocks would roughly cancel out the turnovers in the game score formula. But here's where it gets tricky. There are some years where rebounds weren't differentiated by offensive rebounds or defensive rebounds. And here's the kicker. Offensive rebounds are weighted much higher in the game score formula. So to keep it simple, I categorized all rebounds as defensive ones. And yes, I know, this makes the estimate a bit conservative, but remember, this isn't about perfection, it's a thought experiment, a journey through basketball history where the numbers that we do have can still reveal greatness. So where did we land on the top 5 list? It's Embiid at 5, Kobe at 4, Luka at 3, Jordan at 2, and the new number 1 spot is now held by Wilt Chamberlain in a game where he had a record 100 points and 25 rebounds. He played for the entire 48 minutes and shot 88% from the free throw line, which is insane given that he's a career 51% free throw shooter. As his team started force-feeding the ball to Wilt in the fourth quarter, the other team literally started intentionally fouling other players just to keep Wilt from scoring. But that didn't stop him, and history was made that night in an arena that wasn't even sold out. What's interesting is that only one name actually changed from the top 5 list. Looking at the list makes you realize that peak greatness has existed all throughout the history of the league, not just in recent times. However, it is a much different story when you look at how much the top 100 list has changed. To put into perspective how much the list has changed, let's take a look at who had the 100th best game score, according to the official list. The number 100 spot belonged to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander when he exploded for 45 points, 9 assists, 5 steals, and 2 blocks. SGA only averages about 1 made three-pointer per game, but in this game, he bombarded the Clippers with 4 threes, including a step back against Harden. However, when adding in our unofficial estimated game score metrics, he is now all the way down to number 169. And when you zoom out, the picture becomes clearer. Let's look at the official list one more time. Here's a chart showing how many of the top 100 game scores are within each 5-year increment. But watch what happens when we include our estimated game score calculations for older eras. Between 1961 and 1965, 25 of the top 100 games ever recorded by the game score metric occurred. There were 8 top 100 performances in the 1986 to 1990 era, which was defined by Jordan's pure, concentrated dominance. Then, things slowed down, literally. The 1991 to 2015 seasons were slow and gritty, distinguished by hand-checking defense, iso ball mid-range shots, and overall slower pace of play. Because game score doesn't adjust for pace and defensive quality, there were fewer standout performances during this era. However, by 2016 onwards, everything changed. Three-pointers, faster offenses, increased spacing, all of these optimized offenses to levels we had never seen before. As we look at the new chart, suddenly many of the modern-day performances are replaced by legends of the past. Forgotten stat lines from Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, they're no longer lost to time. By retroactively applying game score, we've brought these historic games back into the conversation. What was particularly shocking was how just a handful of players represented a large portion of the top 100 performances. These were players that consistently dominated night in, night out, redefining what was possible on the court. Here's a chart that shows the most dominant players in NBA history on the left axis and how many times they've had a top 100 game on the bottom axis. We see players like Kareem and Oscar Robertson have a few top 100 games, but as we scroll up, we see players like James Harden and Jordan starting to separate themselves from the pack. And then there's Wilt Chamberlain. Across over 8 decades of NBA history, nearly a third of the top 100 performances belong to just one person. But there's still 2 major problems with this chart. Firstly, while it accurately captures a player's raw box score brilliance, it leaves out a crucial piece of context: pace of play. Not all eras were created equal. Some eras had teams flying up and down the court taking 120 shots per game, while others were slower, more grinded out eras where teams walked the ball up and barely cracked 90 possessions. In the slow eras, players simply didn't have as many possessions to rack up big numbers. Now, the second problem with the chart is that it doesn't account for how difficult it was to score in that era. Defenses in older eras were tougher and more physical, especially when hand checking was allowed. But how do we actually adjust the game score metric? So, to avoid boring you with math and formulas, let me explain it simply. Using metrics such as pace of play, I first looked at how fast the league was playing in a given season and referenced a benchmark. So if the league was playing super fast, I shrank the game score a little. If the league was slow, I boosted the game score. The second thing that I looked at was how easy it was for teams to score within a given era. If it was a high-scoring era, I shrank the game score based on a benchmark. If scoring was difficult, I boosted the game score. Now, do you remember this chart? With our adjustments, it's about to change in a big way. As we move across time, the first thing we notice is that there are now games within the 1946 to 1955 era. As an example, in the late 1940s, George Mikan had a game where he scored 53 points on a 72% true shooting percentage. His game score was around 37.8, but after the adjustment, it jumped all the way to 54.4, allowing him to crack the top 50 performance of all time. So why the big jump? Well, he played in an era where there was no shot clock, which meant that teams were literally holding the ball and stalling the game if they had a lead. Every point mattered simply because there were fewer possessions to accumulate stats. Now let's look at the 1961 to 1965 era. This was the era where the shot clock was fully implemented and the number of possessions in a game surged. Spacing and defensive principles were still developing, but teams started taking advantage of fast break opportunities and played at a chaotic pace. Once we adjust for how many possessions each team had in a game, the number of top 100 performances drops to just 9. The other eras that followed were fairly the same, but there was another big change during the late 1990s to early 2000s. In the official top 100 list, that era basically didn't exist. Only a few games made the cut. This was the dead ball era, where isolation play, hand checking, and packing the paint was at an all-time high. Teams were averaging 10 to 15 less possessions than today's era. But after the game score adjustment, well, that same window jumps up to 17 games. Now you may think that the game score adjustment scaled down many performances of the modern era, with how much easier it is to score today in today's pace. But did it? Well, not as much as you would think. There are still a lot of top performances in the modern era. Sure, it's easier to score, but what may surprise people is that today's pace is actually below average within the historical context of the league. In some eras such as the 1960s, the pace was much faster with teams averaging 20 to 30 more possessions than today's era. Lastly, let me go back to the first 2 questions from the previous video. But who had the most dominant performance of all time, and who has had the most amount of dominant performances of all time? According to our game score metrics on this chart and this chart, it's very clearly Wilt Chamberlain.